From the City of Angels near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. Welcome to Coast AM. Later on tonight, those open lines. Here's what's happening. Look, I warned you about Craigslist. Got to be careful. Listen to this story now. Police said an Army reservist found dead in a St. Louis alley had been shot while family members said he was going to look at a used car advertised on Craigslist before his disappearance. This is just happening way too much. Workers for a demolition company found the body of Robert Lovings Polk, a 22-year-old, in the area of North St. Louis. Investigators aren't sure when Polk was killed. He was last seen October 3rd. He had told his relatives that he was looking to buy a black Mustang being offered for sale on Craigslist. The paper reported that Polk had saved his money and would often check the site for used cars. Look, this is a warning here. If you're going to buy something from Craigslist, do not bring cash with you. I do have to tell you, though, police are monitoring the dead man's financial accounts, and they're investigating a transaction made right before his disappearance. That's all strange. Just be careful. A bomb-sniffing combat dog named Mike that survived 2 tours of duty in Iraq, but not the streets of a little town in Wyoming. The 9-year-old dog was shot and killed in Powell, Wyoming, by a bicyclist who said he was being attacked, leaving Mike's devastated owner, Matthew Bessler, a retired Army Ranger, wondering just how he was going to deal with his own combat-related injuries alone. More than 6,000 deaths a year could be caused by a 30% fall in the effectiveness of antibiotics just in the United States. Most of the extra deaths happen in patients having colorectal surgery, blood cancer, chemotherapy, and hip replacements. Experts said the study confirmed their fears that antibiotic resistance would affect routine surgery. American Airlines, they had a flight delayed by more than an hour by bees that were swarming under a plane wing when it was parked at a Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. There were no bees on the plane. They were just spotted by service crew who saw the bees buzzing under the ring. Nobody wanted to go there, so they called a beekeeper. He came out and he took care of the problem. He left. More bees came back. They called him back up again, and he removed the second swarm of bees. Here's a bizarre story. Scientists are claiming that zapping brains with magnets can treat belief in God. I kid you not, an experiment which claims to be able to make Christians no longer believe in God using a technique called transcranial magnetic stimulation. The researchers can safely shut down certain groups of neurons in the brain with magnets. I had to call our resident psychiatrist, Dr. Peter Bregan, about this story. Peter, magnets in the brain? How does that work?
Well, first of all, George, this is politically motivated mind control.
I think so.
Literally an early experimental effort at using this for mind control. UCLA should be shamed, maybe even sued for this. Basically, when you send magnetic waves through the brain, you disrupt brain function. It's an electrical current. It disrupts brain function. They aim this particular ray system, this magnetic system that disrupts brain function, to an area of the brain which is the same one that psychosurgeons like to operate on because it's got so many dense connections going on throughout the frontal lobes. It is, in effect, George, a frontal lobotomy. And I don't know if this research is even valid or honest or anything,
right,
but clearly this is what's going on.
Sounds dangerous.
Well, I think it's dangerous. These researchers think that people who believe in God are sick. They think people who are against immigration are sick, or concerned about immigration. That was the two issues.
Yeah.
So you get this very left-wing constellation that thinks that believing in God's sick and being concerned about immigration is sick. You take probably some college kids and then you ask them about this, and then you give them this abuse of stimulating their brain, which disrupts frontal lobe function.
With magnets.
With these magnets, and then presumably, if the research is even honest, then they're less concerned by a small amount. It's a fraction. They're a little less concerned. That's what a lobotomy does. It makes you less concerned about what you're feeling. And then they go on and they connect this to potentially dangerous, zealous acts. And that this neuromodulation might be of use as a treatment. George, it really is politically motivated, extreme left-wing in this case, mind control.
That's unbelievable.
I don't know how this stuff gets published.
Well, I'm glad we found this story with you, Peter. Thanks so much. Our feature story at coasttocoastam.com. You're not going to believe this. You've got to look at this picture. A man who had his face and eyeballs tattooed to look like pet parrots has gone a step further. He cut off his ears. He had a surgeon do this now. He's 56 years old. He's obsessed by his pets. He had his face tattooed with colorful feathers. But the animal lover, and who doesn't love animals, right? He's got 110 tattoos, 50 piercings, a split tongue, and now he had both his ears removed by a surgeon in a 6-hour operation. He gave his severed ears to a friend who he said will appreciate them. Now he's planning to find a surgeon to prepare to turn his nose into a beak. That story is our feature story at coasttocoastam.com. Europe and Russia, a mission to assess moon settlements. The European and Russian space agencies are to send a lander to an unexplored area of the moon's south pole. It will be one of a series of missions that prepares for the return of humans to the surface and a possible permanent settlement. The Europeans and the Russians. I think they left us out somewhere. What else is going on in the skies these days? Let's check in with Peter Davenport from the National UFO Reporting Center. Peter, what kind of reports are we getting this week?
Yeah, good evening, George. Boy, it's been a busy week. We just updated our website with 186 reports that we've received since Friday of last week, and I've never seen anything like it, frankly. It's been very busy. But before I get into the reports, I'd just like to comment that on Sunday of this weekend, October 18th, I'm going to be speaking via Skype with the Kansas MUFON chapter in Lawrence, Kansas. So if anybody would like to come and shoot questions at me, I'm sure they're invited to attend that meeting. Starts at 2 o'clock Kansas time, and they can contact MUFON Kansas for details. A lot of reports. I'll limit myself to 5 so I don't go over time this week, George.
Okay, sir.
Just yesterday, I got a report of an event that occurred back in October of 1948.
Wow.
Comes from a gentleman who I presume is a regular Coast listener, but he describes himself as former United States Marine Corps serviceman. He describes that on the 14th or 15th of October 1948, 67 years ago, he was driving north in Florida, very close to, he says, Polk City or Lakeland, driving on State Route 33. Of course, no interstates back in 1948. He looked off to his right and was quite surprised to see a disc, a metallic disc-shaped object, radiating very bright light and illuminating the area around it and illuminating his car. Scared the daylights out of him. He admits that. And it paced him for several miles. The interesting part of this report, George, is he could see that there were creatures on the inside of that disc, he asserts. I couldn't see any details, but the other interesting thing is, at the time this all happened, he estimates he was about a mile, or rather an hour, away from his destination in Florida. He was supposed to have arrived at Friday night sometime, didn't get there until Saturday. Very, very interesting report. People always calling, asking whether I'm interested in past sighting reports. You betcha. This is a good one, and I'd like to thank the gentleman who submitted that report. Monday of this week, Columbus Day, very dramatic event in Rochester, New Hampshire. A gentleman was standing outside his house in a rural part of that community, looked to the northeast and saw an intensely bright strobing light, ran to get his wife. She came out. She saw it. Suddenly the thing jumped to the other side of their house. They ran around, saw it. It suddenly just disappeared from their sight. Came back a few minutes later. They had a brief sighting of it again, but a very, very interesting sighting. I mentioned Rochester because that was where the first sighting occurred related to the Phoenix Lights event back, not Phoenix Lights. The incident at Exeter is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, that was in New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire, back on the 2nd and 3rd of September, 1965, one of the first cases I ever investigated. This report is posted to our website. Last night, Denver, Colorado, yet another sighting of a triangular or scimitar-shaped craft. Very interesting sighting by a group of students in Denver. They saw this thing just glide across the sky absolutely silently. The interesting thing about their report is they report that the object had amber lights on it. Could not have been a classic or terrestrial aircraft with amber lights. A conventional aircraft, of course, has to have red, green, or white lights, no other colors permitted. And last report, George, comes from Augusta, Georgia this evening. Man and his wife were standing outside looking at the clear night sky. Suddenly, a yellow object, about half the size, half the diameter of a full moon, just glided right across them. And the interesting thing is they could hear it as it went over. We have no idea what it was. I haven't gotten a report yet, but we will have that posted the next time we update our website, UFOcenter.com.
That's the website to go to. Peter, thank you. You have yourself a great Skype weekend, my friend. I'll be in Denver doing our Beyond Belief TV shows. Up next, we're going to talk a little bit about In the Shadow of Edgar Allan Poe on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, and back with us, Les Klinger. He has written a number of books, including the new annotated Sherlock Holmes, the new annotated Dracula, and we're going to be talking about In the Shadow of Edgar Allan Poe. Now, Les Klinger, of course, considered to be one of the world's foremost authorities on these icons, Sherlock Holmes and Dracula, and since the 1960s, the study of the rich literature of the Victorian writers has been one of his passions, and here he is back on Coast to Coast. We've missed you, Les. Welcome back.
Thank you, George. It's so nice to be back on the show.
What a great book. I have been fascinated with Edgar Allan Poe, but there were others before him, weren't there?
Yes, indeed. And that's what fascinated me, was that in sort of poking around in 19th century literature, I discovered some of these wonderful writers. I mean, I didn't discover them. Other people discovered them first. But I personally discovered some of these wonderful writers that, in my view, had just gotten lost in the shadow of Poe's greatness.
How great was this guy, Edgar Allan Poe, anyway?
Well, I mean, without even talking about how he invented the detective story, that's a whole other conversation. Poe was the master of the scary short story. I mean, he I think was really the first writer in English to figure out how perfect the short story was to convey the effect, the mood of horror, and really honed it to perfection.
He was born in Boston. He was only 40 years old, and he died. What happened to him?
Well, he overdid it. He was burning his candle at both ends, and drug, alcohol issues, etc. And he was in, therefore, very poor health, and he died far too young.
Way too young. Way too late. And Les, he must have been tough to get along with, too, because, I mean, he must have been a rebel, went to the University of Virginia, he dropped out, he went to the United States Military Academy, he got expelled. He must have had problems relating to people.
I think so. And I mean, you know, he was always the smartest person in the room. So that wouldn't have made him very popular either. He was obsessed with his 13-year-old cousin, who he ended up marrying later.
Oh, boy.
But he also suffered in America from really a lack of appreciation. He had to be discovered in Europe to really become the literary figure that we now know. And it was much later that the Americans picked up on the fact that they had homegrown this brilliant writer. But as I said, he wasn't the first, and he was influenced by other writers who he admired and who have, to some extent, sort of been forgotten, except by scholars. And so the point of this book was to try and present some stories that readers might not be familiar with. This is not a collection of Poe. By the way, my beloved Norton publishers are putting out an annotated Poe. I'm not editing it. My friend Michael Patrick O'Hearn is finishing it up. It should be out, I think, next year. Massive volume, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. So this is not that.
You highlight on a number of people in this book that were probably shadowed by Poe, and let's go through some of them right now.
Sure. Well, the earliest, and I think in some ways the most important, is E.T.A. Hoffmann. So Hoffmann was a German writer, and today he's probably only really remembered for the Tales of Hoffmann, the opera, and for his connection with the Nutcracker, for having written the fanciful story on which the Nutcracker ballet, etc., was based. But he was a very popular author of fantasy and horror. Right, he died in 1822, and his tales were very influential. We're pretty sure Poe knew his work and admired it. And so the story I included here, The Sandman, is really a creepy story. I don't want to give away
no, I understand,
of
but
what
they
it's
are
about,
creepy.
But it will seem very modern, I think, to the contemporary reader. It's really very early science fiction in a way.
They're just as creepy as Poe's work.
Yes, and so, but again, he was not well known in English, and so it was an effort, I think, for Poe to discover him and admire his work. And I'm not going to be responsible for resurrecting Hoffmann's career. He doesn't need my help. But I think those who admire Poe need to find out that there's more out there. There's more like that. Once you've read all of Poe 6 times, there's other writers to discover.
All of them that we're going to buzz through tonight, all of them were in, at least most of them were in the 1800s, and then you have a few in the early 1900s.
Right.
Like 1914, of course,
right.
Bram Stoker, Mr. Dracula, and stuff
I cut it off there, partly for legal reasons, that I wanted to focus on public domain stories, and partly because I think things changed. So I'm actually working on another collection that I'm going to call something clever like In the Shadow of Lovecraft. And I was very happy to be on the show talking about my annotated H.P. Lovecraft the last time. But Lovecraft, who wrote in the 1920s and 1930s, really in many ways changed the face of horror. It's quite different after his influence began to be felt. And different in the sense that his horror was much more, shall I say, scientific. He was looking at how scary it is to find out things about our universe. And that's very different than the kind of supernatural, inexplicable horror that we see in these stories.
Were these writers at their time, when they were living, Les, were they well known?
Some of them. And some more than others, and for different reasons. Hoffmann, for example, as I say, was quite well known. Another, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, was popular and was a newspaper and magazine editor and was quite successful in his career.
Hold on for a second, Les. We're already at the break, but we're going to come back, talk more. Next hour, we're going to open up the phone lines and let you relate some of your favorite horror stories and authors. We'll be back. This really is fascinating. Even I'm learning a lot on this with Les Klinger, our guest, as we talk about In the Shadow of Edgar Allan Poe. Some great writers. I mean, absolutely great writers that were overshadowed because of the great works of Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, welcome back to Coast. Les Klinger with us, of course, In the Shadow of Edgar Allan Poe. Les, I'm going to jump around on some of these authors. I want to jump to Bram Stoker for a moment, of course. Was it the Dracula story that really put him on the map?
No question about it. He wrote almost 15 books in his career, and Dracula stands so head and shoulders over the others. But he was trying his hand at sort of romances, adventures. He had other collections of short stories. The particular collection that this is drawn from is the collection now called Dracula's Guest. That was actually published after he died by his widow. And this and another story called The Judge are just fantastic pieces of horror fiction, totally different from Dracula. And I love to include that here because I wanted people to see that Stoker was not a one-trick pony. He wasn't a great writer when it came to other stuff, but he has some brilliant short stories. The same is true, by the way, for Arthur Conan Doyle, and that was also a great pleasure. That, of course, everybody knows him for writing the Sherlock Holmes stories.
That's right.
Not as many recall that he wrote science fiction and adventure and historical novels and romance and horror. Wrote some brilliant horror stories.
Did they make money in their day?
Oh, certainly. Doyle was one of the highest paid writers of the era. Stoker made some money. He didn't do all that well as a writer. He had his day job. He was the manager of the Lyceum Theater, Henry Irving's repertory company, and that paid his bills. His writing was just an add-on. Another writer included in the collection, Dick Donovan, was a prolific writer of mystery fiction. He did very well with his fiction. But again, not known as a horror writer, known primarily as a mystery writer, but has a great collection of horror stories.
Well, you know what's so amazing? Technology, because they didn't have television, they didn't have radio,
right,
but they had newspapers and they had books. And I would guess at that time, these individuals who wrote books, who maybe published articles in newspapers, they were the media superstars of their time, weren't they?
No question. And you know, to put it in perspective, I mean, the reading public was growing very rapidly at this time as reading was being taught in the public schools for the first time in history, in the free public schools for the first time in history. Add on to that the advent of the railroad, which gave people, you know, free time. I mean, they're sitting on the train they're commuters now. So there was a tremendous surge in the growth of magazines and newspapers. And so those became the outlets for fiction. The short story really reached its peak in this time because it was perfect for a train ride. You could read the story going or coming to work. And so
I would guess everybody who jumped on a train was holding something to read.
Right. And so these magazines, in the Strand, which was a very popular magazine of the day, and numerous others, were very successful. Yeah, it is hard for us to sort of put ourselves into that mindset. No television, no radio, hard to believe. And of course, the stage was not really generally available to the sort of common man. That was for rich people, or they went to the music halls, which was kind of low entertainment.
And look what's happening to media today because of technology. I mean, my gosh, we're streaming, we're everywhere. And I think to really stay abreast of growth, you have to be able to adapt. And, you know, social networking is huge. The internet, by all intents and purposes, has crushed newspapers, almost annihilated magazines, but we've moved on to another form of technology.
Right, and I don't think, I mean, the good news is that it's provided a new outlet for what was a shrinking market for the writers of short stories. People now write, and they may not make much money, but then again, writers never did. but they contribute to online journals, online magazines, online publishers, and get their fiction out there.
If I had to live on the books that I have out there, Leslie, I'd have to have like 9 jobs to support myself. It's a
fortunately,
tough
you
business.
do.
Yeah.
Broadcaster, producer.
Yeah, that's true, too.
Cetera.
That's true. So the short story, the scary short story, how did that come about?
Well, it's got a long history, and I mean really long history, like back to the Greeks and the Bible, where we see scary stuff that got an audience. People liked it. People wanted to read more of it. Short fiction really began with collections of stories by the Greeks and Romans, and then kind of dwindled as publishing wasn't really available. Publishing was for serious books. So it wasn't really until the late 17th and early 18th century that we had short stories starting to appear now. Daniel Defoe, who famously wrote the Robinson Crusoe novel and other books, was writing short stories. And then along came at the end of the 18th century, the Gothic. The really scary stories that explored medieval ideas colliding with the supernatural, colliding with the realism of the modern novel. Novels were the great discovery of the 18th century. Novels were a phenomenon as, again, printing technology changed, and suddenly books could be produced so that ordinary people could read them. And there was actually a great deal of worry that young people, especially women, were succumbing to this mania of reading, so absorbed in the fiction they were reading that they were ignoring real life and their responsibilities and all that. People were writing very serious articles, and there were sermons about it and so on. Fortunately, we got over that, and books went on to have the immense popularity that they gained in the 19th century and on since then. But the Gothic, which was this special form, really took off at the end of the 18th century and led to eventually books like Frankenstein, which happens to be my next annotated book, and the beginning of short story writing in this field. Washington Irving in America was writing scary stories. Everybody knows Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle.
Classics.
There's many more.
Rod Serling says, by the way, that Norman Corwin was one of his influences. He was a writer who then became very well known for writing radio dramas in those days.
Yes. Corwin lived a long time. I mean, Corwin died, I think.
He was 101 years old when he died.
Yeah. I mean,
he died in L.A.
Prolific writer, wonderful radio stuff.
You're in the L.A. area, too, aren't you? Okay,
yes.
Great. We got to get together in the studio again one day.
That would be great.
With these short stories, these horror short stories, when Poe came around, what do you think his influence was?
Well, what he polished the story into was a gem of mood. He saw the short story as the perfect opportunity to create what he described as a single effect, to build an atmosphere that slowly grows into this realization of horror. And it's the perfect length, he thought, and it was the perfect opportunity to do that. I still remember vividly the first Poe story I ever read, The Cask of Amontillado, and it's never left me, that mood. This is for those who don't know the story, and I can't imagine that there are too many who don't. It's about a party goer, having had one too many, goes home with his friend Montresor, and Montresor leads him down to the basement where, just for fun, just for giggles, he puts him into some irons and proceeds to wall him up.
One of a kind. At the end of my program tonight, we're going to do our rendition of the Telltale Heart. If you're still up about 2 o'clock in the morning,
wow,
listen in less.
What a great story.
Who was your favorite writer?
In this collection?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm very fond of the last one in the book. I'm sorry, near the end of the book, an obscure German writer named Hans Heinz Ewers, who wrote an incredibly chilling story called The Spider. This has nothing to do with my long-standing arachnophobia. It's a story about a man mesmerized by, it's really almost the perfect phrase, mesmerized by a woman who may or may not be real, and just sucked into deeper and deeper into a nightmare that does not end well.
Well, she was a psychic vampire type,
yes,
wasn't she?
Yeah. And, it's interesting. I mean, there are echoes of this story in Lovecraft's brilliant Haunter of the Dark. I'm not sure that he read Ewer, but it's very similar in some respects to that story. It's also similar to a couple of novels. I mean, certainly Conan Doyle's novel, The Parasite, is a psychic vampire, and another very famous horror novel of the late 19th century called The Beetle by Richard Sheridan. But brilliantly done. So, I mean, that of this collection, that's probably my very favorite. But it's very hard to pick. There's so many great. Oh,
they're all great. Now, they all had messages behind them. They weren't just stories that left you scared or thrilled. They all had some kind of message behind them.
Sure. Yes. I mean, there is some didacticism here, I guess, to use a scholarly word. For example, I mean, the yellow wallpaper, which is actually a reasonably well-known story and read frequently in feminist studies and the like. Now, to find it in a horror collection is a little bit unusual these days, although she clearly intended it that way. It's a story by a wonderful woman writer named Charlotte Perkins Gilman, really about sort of the isolation of a woman suffering postpartum depression and her diminished role as a woman. I mean, it's about a woman going insane. Desiree's Baby by the now well-known feminist writer Kate Chopin is really a powerful, scary story about racial fear and the horrors of racism. But some of them have had sort of strange effects. Robert Chambers' story, The Yellow Sign, is a fascinating story because it's sort of ripple effects keep going. Many Lovecraft fans were very excited to watch the first season of True Detective because it seemed very Lovecraftian, even though it was a detective story. And in fact, there are actually a number of references to Chambers' King in Yellow and The Yellow Sign in that arc of True Detective. This stuff that, it sort of gets under your skin, some of these stories, and they don't go away.
Or most of the writers are men, though, aren't they?
Most, but the 19th century produced some wonderful women writers, and there are more than one expects. So I think in the collection I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 or 6 women writers out of 20 stories.
Let's say Mary Shelley, when she wrote Frankenstein, that was when? When did she write that? In the 1800s?
Earlier, 1818. Well, I mean, earlier, before even, before all of the stories except Hoffman's. Yes, Frankenstein is published 1818. And she's incredibly young at the time, keep in mind. I mean, she was born in 1797. So, she's this 21-year-old girl when the book comes out.
Technically, how did they write their books, and how did they publish them?
These are most of these appeared in magazines.
Really?
But not all.
Okay.
Yeah, many of them appeared in magazines. That was the profitable outlet. You'd sell your story to a magazine, and then later, after you'd built up a body of them, you would collect them into a book form and publish them that way. A couple of them came out in books originally, but most of them appeared in magazines.
Just amazing. Truly amazing. Now, back to Poe for a second. At least anybody forgets about this guy. What was his big hit? What really got him on his road to success?
Well, I mean, he was the editor of a magazine, and Chambers, I think, is the name of the magazine. And so he could slip his own stories into the magazine. But eventually, I mean, his first collection was called Tales, and it was a collection of his own stories. And it, as I said, was successful in England and the continent. And that was really what cemented him in the heavens of mystery writers and horror writers, was that collection of short stories. But I mean, he got high critical marks fairly early in his career, unlike compared to the Lovecraft.
And then his wife died of tuberculosis at 24, and he fell apart.
Yes.
He fell to drinking.
He fell into the bottle.
Yep.
I mean, many say. And he was not the most stable guy. I mean, these stories are reflective of a pretty disturbed person.
Yes, you got to be a little macabre to write these kinds of stories.
Yeah. I'm not sure you have to be. I mean, it's interesting. Arthur Conan Doyle is sort of as far away from Edgar Allan Poe as you can get, and yet wrote stories like Lot 39 and the Leather Funnel, which is essentially a mummy story, the Leather Funnel, and other really scary stories. And here's a guy who was sort of as normal as you could be, and Stoker was too.
You would
Stoker
think,
was, big, bluff, hardy guy, sportsman, kind of guy who you'd see at the sports bar if it was today. And so you got all types. I mean, Ambrose Bierce was kind of creepy. Gilman was apparently had a strange life. Hoffman was pretty weird, but some of them were very normal people who just had great imaginations. Chambers, for example, the author of The King in Yellow and The Yellow Sign, really made his big success writing romantic stories.
See, which was totally opposite what I would think would have sold, but I guess they were into everything in those days, weren't they?
You bet.
All right, Leslie, stay with us. Les Klinger, our guest. We're going to take phone calls next hour about these kinds of short stories, or if you want to even share one of your favorite short stories, go ahead. We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, this hour we're going to take your phone calls. Les Klinger, our guest, in the shadow of Edgar Allan Poe. Welcome back to Coast. Les Klinger with us in the shadow of Edgar Allan Poe. That's his work. You know, we have, right before Halloween this year, Friday, we're going to have our annual Ghost to Ghost show, Les. People like being scared.
Yes.
How come? What is it about the humankind?
Well, my theory, and I'm sure that psychologists will tell me that I'm wrong, but my theory is that it's about practice. It's the same theory that I have about dreaming. Why do we have nightmares? We're rehearsing how we're going to handle the real thing when it comes along. And this is a very controlled experiment. We can always close the book. We can always shut off the television. So it's a great way to practice.
Practice makes perfect, doesn't it?
Sometimes. I mean, I wouldn't want to actually have the real thing of some of these things happen, but it's good to practice.
Are many of these made into little movies or
Sure.
TV shows?
Yes. Some of them, of course, have been on some of the famous anthology shows, Outer Limits, Twilight Zone, and so on. And I think it's really sad that television has gotten away from that.
I do too.
I love those anthologies. But today, it's the domain, because filmmaking has gotten much easier. We see a lot of independent filmmakers who make short films out of some of these great stories.
And cheap, too.
Yes.
I mean, it's just amazing what some of them have been able to do.
There is actually several annual Lovecraft film festivals, which are not strictly all Lovecraft films, based on Lovecraft stories. Many of the films, the short films in that, are based on Poe and some of the other great horror writers.
When you look at some of the work that Edgar Allan Poe put together, was he very prolific? Did they just keep coming?
Yes. And of course, he was also a poet as well as a short story writer. And he was really the first to try and make a living out of being a writer. He didn't do very well with it, but he was certainly he didn't fail because of lack of effort. He had a number of volumes of poetry. He had prose. He was editing magazines, as I said. And eventually he did achieve some success. It was hardly instant. I mean, The Raven, when he finally published The Raven, I mean, who has not read The Raven?
Yeah.
But he was 36. He would only live 4 more years after that. And that was really finally the sort of great public recognition of his work.
Was he frustrated as a writer?
Oh, I think so. I think he thought that he deserved a lot better recognition than he ever got. He didn't feel that he was appreciated here. So I'm sure he was very frustrated.
All right, let's take some calls here. Let's go to our first-time caller, Stephen in Eugene, Oregon. Hi, Stephen. Go ahead, sir.
Evening, gentlemen. Yes,
Hi.
love all those stories. Been reading them since I was a kid. And in the spirit of Lovecraft and the election season, vote Cthulhu. Why settle for the lesser evil?
There you go.
But I was curious if you'd ever read any William Hope Hodgson's.
Yeah.
Oh, particularly, yes, the Nightland and the Sea Stories, especially the Boats of the Glen Carrig. Wonderful, wonderful.
Yes, I mean, this anthology
stories.
could have been 100 stories, but publishers don't like anthologies that size. So we sharply limited it, and there's many, many other writers that could have been included, Hodgson certainly among them.
Was it always the last moment of this short story that gotcha?
Well, yes, because what we're trying to, as I said, Poe is striving for, certainly Poe and many of these other writers, sort of building the mood and then finally letting you see what's going on. Lovecraft described the great horror stories as being hoaxes. What he meant was they have to be 99% credible. The 1% can be that supernatural element, and so you try and build it as a prosaic, everyday story that suddenly takes a twist. And the twist, of course, probably goes at the end.
Yeah, he wanted reality mixed into this incredible ending, didn't he?
Yes. And Poe's are very much the same. I mean, who can read The Pit and the Pendulum without seeing how you do that? You know, that here's a story that turns on a dime in the last sentence.
Did the style of the writings change less over the years from the 1800s into the 1900s?
Yes, I think in the 1800s we have a more leisurely style, and as I said, we don't have the short story nearly as popular. The short story is a 19th century phenomenon. There were some in the 18th century, but they didn't really become popular until the 19th century.
Did Reader's Digest pick up any of these during those days?
The equivalent, yes. There were certainly magazines, but again, I mentioned a couple of the titles, and there were a number of magazines, and they aimed at different audiences. I mean, there were household magazines, there were children's magazines, and there were magazines aimed at the average person reading fiction for pleasure.
Jay is in Ohio. Welcome to the program, Jay. Good morning.
How you doing?
Okay.
I'm just going to say, first of all, my favorite Poe story has got to be the Fall of the House Usher. I don't think it gets nearly enough recognition. But my question to you is a lot of there's been some thought on that Poe's legacy was kind of tainted by some people who were left alive after him, who had kind of a bone to pick with him, some editors and people who were competitors at other magazines and stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's some truth to that. He really did not achieve American celebrity until well after his death. He really and it really burned him during his lifetime that he wasn't getting that recognition. It's sad that it took the Europeans to discover him, mainly the French, that when Baudelaire translated his work into French and he became the rage in France, it translated into American influence much later in the century.
This disappointment at not getting that instant recognition, the money, did it haunt him?
It certainly had an effect on his career decisions. So I think yes. I mean, he was disturbed, and some psychologists would read that disillusionment in his stories. There aren't a lot of happy people in his stories
because he wasn't happy.
Right.
It really echoed the author.
Write what you know.
Mm-hmm. In terms of these incredible endings, because he had Hitchcockian-type endings, how did he do that? What do you think?
Genius, I guess, is the simple answer. But it was a deliberate approach. It was an idea that you should, as I've said several times, that you should be building the mood, aiming for a specific effect. And so I think these were very meticulously edited, very carefully crafted stories that were building to that moment. So, I mean, it was quite intentional.
Did he feel that he had competition from any of these writers that you've looked at in the book, In the Shadow of Edgar Allan Poe?
I don't think so. I mean, very few of them were actually literally his contemporaries. And while he greatly admired Hoffman, who I mentioned earlier, I mean, Hoffman died when he was much younger, when Poe was much younger. And so, no, these were not competitors to him. He wasn't trying to outdo them. He was just trying to perfect his own writing.
If somebody wrote a short story for the magazine of the time, what do you think they got paid for that?
Oh, very little. Very little. They might get $10, $20, something like that.
Which would be the equivalent of what today?
Well,
a couple thousand?
Probably not even that. Depends on the length of the work. I mean, some of them were getting, really very little, but the fees were certainly not enough to make a living. I'm not sure what the amounts were that Poe was getting paid, but they were pittances. I mean, if we shoot forward to Lovecraft and learn that he was selling stories for $25, $35 in the 1930s, project back, Poe was not well paid either.
So they weren't writing for money, were they?
No, they were not.
It was love.
Poe was trying. Poe was trying to make a living at it, but the market wasn't there.
It wasn't there for that, no. And in terms of newspapers, did any of them do anything syndicated?
Well, yes. I mean, a lot of these... Well, first of all, in America, we had the wonderful situation that European writers were routinely syndicated, as we'd say. The stories would appear in multiple newspapers, and they didn't get paid anything.
They just took the story.
Just took them.
Yeah.
They pirated them. So in America, you could sell a story, however, to a chain of newspapers and have it appear in multiple places. So there was some of that going on, but not for the Europeans.
Let's go to Al, truck driving in Nevada. Al, you're up.
How you doing?
Okay.
I don't have a comment on any of Allan Poe's books, but I do have a question about the bottle of cognac, if that was solved. And it also seems like not only did Poe's influences writers, but I believe Alan Parsons wrote an album or a song called The Raven pertaining to Allan Poe. Whoever can answer that.
Sure did. And what was his favorite drink? Was it cognac?
That's that's certainly what it's said to have been, yes. And I never got to drink with him, so I can't say what he would have offered. But and of course, numerous films based on Poe's work, and in many cases, like Lovecraft, films that simply borrowed the title and then went on to make their own stories up.
I mean, we studied Poe in our English classes in high school, and I was mesmerized by the guy. I mean, those short stories, the horror stories, the endings. I mean, I love that stuff.
It was great stuff. They're just gem-like. He was a great writer, and he was thoughtful about writing in general. I mean, he was probably best known, interestingly, during his career as a critic more than a writer, as an editor of a magazine, as a critic, and he was well regarded in that respect. It wasn't his own writing that got attention until, as I said, till the end of the 19th century.
Guy, Texas we go. John's with us. Hi, John. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I'm a lover of Poe for many years. I read Poe when I was very young. Murders in the Rue Morgue and The Telltale Heart has got to be my favorite. But I was wondering, what would your take be on O. Henry? He had several stories that he was known for his twist at the end of In Gift of the Magi, and he wrote some very poignant stuff, like Road to Destiny was one of my favorites.
Certainly, there were other great short story writers out there. I mean, Bret Harte, Mark Twain, and O. Henry, and later a writer known as Saki, who were very successful short story writers. They did not, with the exception of a few stories, they did not generally write horror fiction or these kinds of dark tales. O. Henry's stories are much more sort of Norman Rockwell almost, in being uplifting and heartwarming stories about people.
How did you pick the individuals and the stories that you put into this book?
Wow. There was a certain amount of dart throwing, only because my list was so long of the stories that I loved and I wanted to include. Some of them were easy in the sense that I definitely knew I wanted to include Stoker and Doyle and Le Fanu, only because people know them for other works, and I wanted to show some of their versatility. In the case of a couple of them, they're known in other fields. Dick Donovan, I mentioned, who's best known as a mystery writer. And then within them, I mean, I read a lot of their stories and sort of picked the ones that struck me. I was trying to go for stories that weren't ones that everybody knew. I didn't want to have all the commonly anthologized stories, but some of them were unavoidable. The Yellow Wallpaper has now been in a lot of collections, but it's such a brilliant story. I just had to include it.
Let's take a few more calls before the break, and then we'll come back with some final calls with our special guest, Les Klinger. His website, linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. Let's go out to Honolulu in Hawaii. Hello, Rudy. Good morning to you.
How are you doing today?
Good, Rudy. Thank you.
The reason I'm calling is I don't hear him talk very much about Edgar Allan Poe's The Strange Adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym.
Oh, well. Wow. So,
what's that do for us, Les?
Well, so Pym is a fascinating story because it's viewed as you pushed my button on that one. It's a prequel in many ways to Lovecraft's brilliant masterpiece called At the Mountains of Madness. It's a story about a man journeying down to up to the North Pole and seeking the unknown. And Lovecraft ran with it and gave us the South Pole and took it even further. But clearly he knew the Pym story, and the Pym story doesn't get widely read anymore. It was very popular among Poe's work in the 19th century, and actually another sequel to it was written by Jules Verne.
Huh. When Poe died, was there a vacuum there in terms of other writers? Did anybody step in to replace him?
Well, certainly there was a vacuum on the mystery side. Poe, we haven't really talked much about that, and that's really, as I said, sort of a whole other conversation about Poe as the father of the mystery short story.
Right.
But on the mystery side, there was a long gap. On the horror side, we had these other writers who took up the mantle, and many of them, I think, were influenced by Poe directly. Many of them simply came to the same ideas that Poe did and began to write this. So no, there wasn't really a vacuum. I mean, we can see Poe stands head and shoulders above the other writers, but there was a great deal of this kind of writing in the 19th century.
Must have been exciting times to be around then and really see some quality writing pop out, huh?
I think, we all wring our hands about the golden age being in the past. There's some really quality writing being done right now. There's some brilliant writers of both long and short horror fiction. I'm proud to be the treasurer of the Horror Writers Association.
Good for you.
It's an amazing collection of modern writers.
Great cover, by the way, in this book, In the Shadow of Edgar Allan Poe.
I take no credit for that. The brilliant people at Pegasus Books
did a great
put together
job.
An amazing cover.
And the feeling of that book cover is amazing, isn't it?
Yes, it's almost like spooky velvet.
Yeah, it really is. All right, stay with us. We're going to come back in a moment with Les Klinger. We'll take some final calls before we go into open lines about Edgar Allan Poe, about some of the other incredible authors of the day, and your favorite short horror stories. Well, you're looking for something to do this weekend? Try ParanormalDate.com. That's right. Have some fun and meet some people of like minds and interests. Just go to the website. Free to sign up. Go to ParanormalDate.com. Okay, welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you, Les Klinger, and a whole bank of phone calls, Les, so let's get right to them. We go to Madison, Wisconsin. Jim, welcome to the program. Thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Good morning, sirs.
Hi, Jim.
I'm a big fan of Victorian ghost tales, and one of my favorite authors is a guy named Oliver Onions, who wrote The Beckoning Fair one.
Don't know it. I'm writing this down.
Well, that's one you ought to check out. Oliver Onions is the author's name, Victorian ghost tale writer. My favorite one of his is called The Beckoning Fair one, although there is an anthology of a collection of his works as well. And if you're a fan of Victorian tales, I'm sure you'd enjoy it.
Great. Thank you.
You betcha.
There must be thousands of other writers out there, Les, that are very talented.
Yes, and I'm not ashamed to say I haven't read them all.
Nope, you can't read them all. You'd be reading forever.
Yes. How great would that be?
So where are we with reading today? I mean, aren't book sales down? Isn't reading down compared to years ago?
I think the numbers of books sold they're depressingly low numbers. I think the number still is that the average American buys 2 books a year. That's pretty depressing when you consider that includes things like how to learn how to operate Windows 10. We're not talking about just fiction.
Right.
But, the media have changed, and I'm not worried about reading. Reading is doing just fine. There are tens of thousands of works of fiction published every year, and authors are not making any less than we ever made historically. We're still starving. And I think there's still an enormous appetite for good writing and for reading. I see it at conventions and gatherings of writers and readers that that enthusiasm is still there.
We go to Venice, California, one of our nice spots. Bill is with us. Hi, Bill. Thanks for calling.
Hello, Mr. Norrie. Hi.
Hi, Bill.
Good evening out here in West Coast. I wanted to ask your guest if Edgar Allan Poe, what was his influences in regard to writing, such as Henry David Thoreau?
Yes.
Or perhaps Hawthorne?
Well, certainly, I think Hawthorne was likely to be one of his influences, as were the early Romantic poets. He admired Coleridge, he admired Shelley, he certainly knew Frankenstein and works like that as the products of the Romantics. Thoreau's a little after his time, so I don't know that there was much influence there. And I also mentioned E.T.A. Hoffmann early in the show, an important early German fantasist that Poe knew and admired.
Let's go to Columbus, Ohio. Robert's turn on Coast to Coast. Hello, Robert. Go ahead.
Hey, George. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Great. Hello, Les.
Hi there.
Great show tonight. Yes, I wanted to know if you've ever seen the statue in Boston of Edgar Allan Poe. It's in a small park, and it's a life-size statue, and it looks like he's walking through the park. There's a large raven, like near his arm, and then there's trails of book pages that are his stories.
How wonderful. No, I have not seen it.
It really captures a spooky essence because it's like he's walking through the park and it's surrounded by trees. And I was just there recently and saw that, and I just wondered if you had seen it.
I had not. That's great. I'm going to look for it next time I'm there.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, that's the way to do it. Les, so what's next for you? You're putting together more works, aren't you?
Yes. I'm working on the annotated Frankenstein. That'll come out from Norton in 2017. But much more importantly, George, I'll take a second to tell you about a project I'm working on with Professor Laura Caldwell. It's a collection called Anatomy of Innocence. It's true stories about wrongly incarcerated individuals. It's their own stories told to major thriller writers like Lee Child and Sarah Paretsky and other great writers. This is going to come out from Norton next year. All of the profits would go to the Life After Innocence project, which works with exonerees to help them re-enter society. We're very excited about this book.
Good for you. You're still bullish on writing and books, aren't you?
I love writing. I'm so sorry it took me until I was in my 50s to start writing. And, it's like, wow, why wasn't I? I mean, writing, I've always written. I'm a lawyer by day. But writing books and articles, and it's just such joy.
One of those old sayings, don't leave your day job?
Right.
Miami, Florida. Hi, Peter. Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Norrie.
Hello, Peter. Good to have you with us.
Yes. Nice to talk to you. I grew up reading Hardy Boys,
yes.
And in between waiting for the next Hardy Boys to come out, I would read Rudyard Kipling's.
One of the most prolific and and no longer thought of as a great writer. It's too bad.
Oh, he
was a fabulous writer. And I mean, when I say no longer thought of as a major writer, because I think the material is a little bit dated. He's become non-PC. He was writing at the height of the empire. And he was intensely loyal to England and a supporter of empire. So some of the material is a little dated. I've always wanted to do the annotated Kim, which is just a fantastic book about the experience of the British in India and the experience of the Indians with the British. A very honest and realistic book, I think, in many ways. But Kipling, fortunately, he was the highest-paid writer of the day, but I don't think he gets enough attention anymore.
His classic poem, as far as I'm concerned, If. It's one of the best, isn't it?
Yes. Close friends with Arthur Conan Doyle. There was a small circle of some of these writers. Bram Stoker was actually part of that circle of friends as well.
What motivated Stoker to do Dracula?
Wow. He says it was a nightmare that he had. That must have been some bad crab that he ate or lobster.
Something was bad. Wow.
Something was really bad. He had a nightmare, but I think that's a facile explanation. I think he was fascinated by folklore. His short story collections, which I said are sort of largely overlooked now, the earliest collections, are all folklore tales. His mother was a consummate storyteller in the family situation, and he liked telling stories. He loved theater, and he loved storytelling.
Well, and that's the art of a lot of these authors. You can tell that they are great storytellers. I mean, these are the kind of folks you want to be out there with a campfire and listen to them, just to listen to them.
Absolutely. I can't imagine. I mean, we've already mentioned Conan Doyle and Kipling, and wow, they were storytellers.
Anderson, South Carolina, it's Charles' turn. Charles, you're up with us on Coast to Coast.
Yeah, well, I've always been a night owl, and George, I absolutely love the show.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
I've always lived in South Carolina, and I grew up in the Low Country, and I became a huge fan of Nancy Roberts. I probably read everything she's ever wrote several times. Yeah. And I also used to get those Alfred Hitchcock magazines in the mail all the time.
Yes.
I wish I had kept them. They might be worth something right
Well, they might. And the good news is Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine is still being published. There are two great magazines that both published by the same company. One is called Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, and the other is called Alfred Hitchcock. And they're still coming out, and they're great.
Nancy Roberts was called the First Lady of American Folklore.
Yeah, she was great. I wanted to ask you, a few years ago, I saw a documentary probably on the History Channel, and they suggested that Poe might have died of rabies, and I thought, now that would be a weird way for a man like that to check out. And I was wondering if Les had heard that and what you might have thought of it. And I'll take it off
I had not.
You got it.
I had not. I've heard the other rumor is syphilis, but I don't. We just don't really know.
If he was bitten by a dog, I hope it had red eyes, right?
I hope so too. Probably the Hound of the Baskervilles.
It would be the fitting
the
way.
Of the Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yeah, the fitting. Did he have family?
Not for long. No, I mean
the wife died at 24.
Right.
He died at 40.
Right, and no children. So there was really no family. The cause of his death has been attributed to drinking, brain congestion, drug overdoses.
Oh, geez.
Rabies is certainly one of them. Cholera, tuberculosis. Nobody knows.
Well, people didn't live that long in those days anyway, did they?
40 was
some
pretty
of
young.
them.
But
40
but
was
you're
young.
right. I mean, Lovecraft died at the age of 47. Another sad case, similar in many ways to Poe. He greatly admired Poe. Really wanted to be Edgar Allan Poe. But writing of this kind and writing with this sort of burning flame, I think, really consumes these kinds of writers.
Before we go to final calls, what are we doing now to create new writers, new Edgar Allan Poes, new Arthur Conan Doyle's, new Bram Stoker's? What are we doing for that?
I mean, I think I am encouraged to see people in schools still writing and people reading and writing. I just came back. I spent the day at Eastfield College in Mesquite, Texas, talking to students and faculty about Sherlock Holmes and the mystery genre. And it was interesting to me. Some of the students, one of the students said to me he was embarrassed to tell me that he only read comic books. And I said, be proud. First of all, there are some great writers writing comic books these days. And second, graphic novels have now gotten to be a big deal. You see them on bestseller lists and all that. Another person said they only read manga. And I said, manga is great. They love Sherlock Holmes. They love mysteries and all that. So reading is out there. It's taking many different forms. The schools are still the beacons of literature, and I'm encouraged.
Every time I go back to Detroit, Mom's still in the house that I was 8 years old in, and I tear the place up looking for my baseball cards and my comic books.
I know. My comics, I think, are long gone. Sad to say. Twice I've lost collections of comics. Now mine are carefully taken care of. I have Sherlock Holmes, Vampire, Lovecraft, Frankenstein, and other strange comics, but they're well.
I mean, when I was 10, 1960, what kind of comics I would have had almost like originals, wouldn't I?
Sure, you would have
in
had
those
early
days.
DCs, and then you were at the right time. We're similar ages, George. That we were lucky when the Marvel comics were first coming out.
Yeah.
Spider-Man and all those. I was in college. I was like, wow, these are great things.
Remember Archie?
Of course.
Is he still out there?
Still out there. There's a wonderful crossover comic out there now, too, called Archie versus Predator.
Let's go to Kat in Atlanta, Georgia. Kat, thanks for calling. Go ahead. Hi, Kat.
Good morning. I'm in the process of reading the letters of Flannery O'Connor from the archives of Emory University.
Okay.
And in those letters to Betty Hester, she writes that she read very little of the great writers before she went to college, but she was able, from the limited library of Milledgeville, Georgia at that time, to obtain and read the humorous stories of Edgar Allan Poe. And I'd like you to speak about Poe's humorous stories. The stories that she mentioned was a man too vain to wear glasses, and he falls in love with his grandmother. O'Connor says she thought he was drunk when he wrote it, so I wasn't able to find anything about
I loved my grandmother's, but not that way. Put the glasses on.
I must say, I don't know anything about Poe's humor writing. I don't know that there is much of it. Some of the stories are bizarre, and they're almost comical in that respect. But I don't think he ever thought of himself as a humorist.
What did you think, and what do you think of Stephen King and some of his short stories?
I love Stephen King's writing.
Is he like the Edgar Allan Poe of today?
I don't think so. I think he's not trying to do that. I mean, first of all, I don't think. I mean, while he has written many short stories and he's quite good at it, he doesn't really. It's not. He wouldn't hold himself out as that being his big thing. It's not what he likes to do. And I think he is more interested in character than Poe ever was. And I think also King's writing, especially in the last. But
scary.
There's a certain nostalgia.
That it thing with that clown with the file teeth, I didn't like that.
Peter Straub is a wonderful writer of horror as well, and both of them have, I think, a great deal of nostalgia elements in their story too, about what we've lost with urban environments and the loss of small towns and all that. I think probably the greatest proponent of the short story and the scary short story of the 20th century is Ray Bradbury.
Let's go to New Orleans. Edwin's turn on Coast to Coast. Hello, Edwin. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing, George?
Good, Edwin.
My first time calling, so I'm so glad I was able to
Super.
get in. And right before I got in, you kind of stole my thunder with Stephen King, because that is my favorite author of all time.
He's one of the best.
Stephen King, I eat up. And I kind of actually wanted to bring that out, that I actually thought I was thinking on Stephen King and Edgar Allan Poe about a month ago, and I was like, Stephen King has got to be, the modern-day Edgar Allan Poe, if not for similar writing, but for, just mastery of writing. He is just, he's awesome.
He is spot on, to be sure. I've been trying to get him less on the show. If I ever do, I'll get you on with me and we'll chat with him.
Delightful. I've talked to him a few times, and we have many interests in common. I mean, he loves Lovecraft, he loves Dracula, he loves Sherlock Holmes, and I've been trying to get him to write a story for me for our anthologies of Sherlock Holmes stories, but he's a busy guy.
Wally is in Wilmington, Delaware. Wally, got about a minute for you, but go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I recite the Reverend every year at the Deer Park Hotel.
Perfect.
New York, Delaware.
Wonderful. It was the first piece of poetry that I was forced to memorize when I was a kid, but amazingly, it didn't take anything away from it, even though it was forced.
Well, it's I have a sort of a cult following down there.
Good for you.
Been doing this for about 20 years. And
it's one of those things that just works really well read aloud.
Yeah, it really does. And then the reaction of people after you read it, that's fantastic. I hope young people get a chance to really witness the great works of the Edgar Allan Poes and the so many people that you've illustrated in the shadow of Edgar Allan Poe. I hope the schools are still teaching them, are they?
I'm sure they're teaching Poe. I'm not sure that we're getting readers to look beyond Poe. And it would be nice to imagine that schools might buy this book and use it as a text.
That would be nice.
But I think that's not yet going to happen. Poe has made it into the official pantheon of great American writers, and most of these have not yet reached that level of achievement.
You stay in touch with us, my friend. We'll be back in a moment with open lines now on Coast to Coast. Plus, I want you to react if you think we are in end times. We'll be back. Yes, my friends, open lines right here on Coast to Coast AM. Plus, I want you to check in with me if you think, because look at what has been going on all around this planet. I keep watching this situation between Israel and the Palestinians, and my gosh, it's unbelievable. It just doesn't stop. Do you think we're in end times? Check in with me on that, plus your open line calls on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast to Coast. You know, that story we've been following for the last week or so started last Tuesday during our chat when one of our Coast Insiders said, George, I just heard a story about megastructures out there in the universe. Follow up on it, and we did. One of the scientists involved in the story, and I'll fill you in on just what the story is, of course, in a second here, Jason Wright from Penn State University, I think he's kind of backtracking. Or he was grossly misinterpreted. The story had to do with a 1,480 light-year star system that's out there. 1,480 light years out there. That means it takes 1,480 years for that light from that star to get here. It's a long, long way. But with Kepler, they were able to determine that there's a strange anomaly out there. There's something weird. They're not sure what it is. Could be particles from comets. Could be just about anything. But the conclusion was, if it's none of those, then it's got to be extraterrestrial. And so Jason Wright, the scientist astronomer, said it's probably the last-ditch reason for this anomaly. But that didn't get picked up that way. So instead, some of the other media outlets and hosts started running around going, oh my God, there are aliens out there and everything's happening and they're using this to harness energy from the sun. And it's a great story. It's romantic, it's exciting, it's everything. But you know what? I don't think that's the story. I think there's a scientific reason for that situation. I believe in ETs, believe me, but not in this case. And the fact that the scientists are really downplaying this thing. I mean, really. We even called Jason Wright to try to get him on the show. He didn't even want to come on. He didn't even want to go there. So, another possible story, I think, has been blown out of proportion. And you want to get the truth, you just come here to Coast AM. So let's go to the phones. Let's start open lines. And don't forget, Tom's got the text phone. We'll take some of your calls that way, too. And I'm going to start implementing Twitter quick questions as well. We're going to start doing that for you in another week or so. I might even be doing that during our Ghost to Ghost show. Let's go to Joe in the Bronx on Coast to Coast. Hello, Mr. Music Man. How are you?
Hey, thank you, George. I'm doing okay, thanks.
Good.
I wanted to ask you a question. What's your most vivid Halloween memory?
When I was a kid, two things, two different Halloweens. One is the guy who lived across the street from us in Dearborn Heights. His name was Mike. God rest his soul. He's not around. This must have been, we moved there in 1958, so it must have been around 1962 or so. I was just a little kid. He would give us, everybody, as kids, we all wanted candy, right?
Right.
You did, I did.
Of course.
He would give us pennies.
Oh.
1 penny. I don't know in 1962, Joe, what 1 penny was worth today. But as kids, when we emptied the sack, getting pennies is something we didn't want. And I will always remember my face and the face of the kids when we'd go up to that porch, do our thing, and he'd come out with a roll of pennies and just kind of flip one right into the old bag. I hate it. And the other one was Mrs. Chastain. We won't forget her. She was a witch when she wasn't in costume, and she was even worse when she was in costume. This lady, we would play baseball in the street. Did you ever do that when you were a kid?
Sure.
Baseball in the street. Yep, stickball in the street, football in the street, touch football, everything. Hockey in the street.
All of that.
From the cold Detroit at the time, that's what we did. But if a ball went on her grass, she'd come chasing us. And in some cases would take the ball and run in the house. And, it was like you can't walk on the grass. And it was like a sin if you didn't walk on the sidewalk. And as I got a little older, I said to myself, isn't grass supposed to be walked on? I mean, it was almost as if she made you think that the grass was going to die the minute you walked on it. But on Halloween, we went there, and she came out in such a hideous costume. She scared the heck out of us. Except the next day, we realized that's the way she dressed. It wasn't a costume at all. She was wearing the same thing, doing whatever she did, but we'll never forget her. I wasn't in a group of kids. We didn't soap windows. Mm-hmm. We didn't throw toilet paper in trees. Mm-hmm. And, we're pretty straight guys. We just, did our thing, but I mean, I'll always remember stuff like that. And then you get to a point where I can't remember when I stopped going out for Halloween. It just ended all of a sudden. Something happened. Mm-hmm. We grew up. We weren't kids anymore.
That's true.
How about you? What was your most memorable one?
Well, I don't have any one most memorable, but we used to go out to other neighborhoods, and we used to go in groups, and found that some of the candy in certain neighborhoods were better than others. And I didn't have my parents checking my candy at all the way they have to, unfortunately, these days. But I do remember getting favorite candies like Hershey's, Mr. Goodbars, stuff like that.
Those were the great ones.
The chocolate.
Yeah. Sky Bars were great. Remember those?
Vaguely.
They had 5 different sections of different, like caramel or caramel, however you want to pronounce it, marshmallow. It was great. And I found a company, Joe, that makes them still.
Really?
And
vintage candy.
Bought them up and gave them out to people. That's great. I got to do a show on old-time candy. As crazy as that sounds, you will not believe how many people will call in on that.
Oh, of course. You have many fans out there.
It. Okay, Joseph. Hey, and by the way, did you get your music to Tom? Are you going to do that?
Yes, definitely.
Let's try to highlight you on the first Sunday in November, okay?
Great. Yeah, I'll do it.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. Yep, he's a musician. Let's go to Sherry in Southfield, Michigan, where I used to work at WJBK Television and WXYZ back in my early Detroit days. Hi, Sherry. Good to have you back. Good.
I talked to you about a week ago regarding that woman who threw the gasoline all over the other woman because she hit her car with the
that was crazy.
And even since then, we've had more things happen here that are weird, and I'm hoping it's not the end times. But, George, also, I loaned people money throughout my life. I have no money left. I was not really trying to be God or like you and Wayne Dyer, but I helped people thinking that they understood they had to pay me back right away. They haven't. And I would like to do voiceover work, but I don't know if I can go through all the procedures that are required. I don't know if you could refer me to somebody where you used to work. And I have the most beautiful used Ford Escort I've been trying to sell, no luck. And also there's other things that I could do, but I don't know what.
Well, what kind of voice work do you want to do? Like for radio stations?
Like for commercials or whatever.
Oh, you should pound the doors of some of those great radio stations all over the place.
Well, I'm told you have to make a tape. And
you have to do that. That's true.
And I don't know. I just thought, can't I walk into a place and they could help me? Like, remember Lee Allen on the horn?
Oh, Lee Allen. I run A Letter from Michael on Christmas Eve.
I know.
Every year.
I know.
It's a tradition.
And he has a studio, and if he still does, I wonder, can't I go into a place like that and they could help me make the tape and help me market it?
Let's see what you could say. I want to do a test with you here.
Okay.
Let's just say you're listening to Coast AM with George Norrie. Ready, go.
You're listening to Coast with George Norrie on the radio.
Voice work, huh? How much do you think you want to get paid for that?
I don't know. Usually I sound a lot better than this. But I was hit by a car in a van 18 years ago. I had been beaten up my whole life. I wanted to help people. I thought if I could do something wonderful, as long as they realized they had to pay me back immediately or I wouldn't be able to do it, then I thought I'd be doing something really great. Well, I loaned over $36,000 throughout my life.
And it never came back, did it?
Pardon me?
Never came back to you, did it?
No, and one person right now, this is not that long ago, owes me just under $23,000. I don't know where she is.
Did you do it in stages with her, or?
Yes, it was a tiny amount, and then it grew, and I kept telling her it's been like over 8 years.
Why'd you keep doing it once you realized she wasn't paying you back?
Well, she kept saying she was
Fool me once, remember?
Pardon me?
Fool me once.
Right, but she kept saying she was going to have the money soon. She had a lot of children, and she didn't want to be evicted, so I kept telling her I have to have it right away. Well, now I have just a tiny, tiny amount left, not enough, and I get $566 a month from Social Security. I heard they're going to be lowering our amount next year. And
well, you're not going to get a raise, but some pensions are being lowered. I don't think they'll lower your Social Security, but it's not going to go up.
Well, I haven't worked for 18 years. I don't have a pension. I pay $725 a month. I don't want to move out.
Well, wait a minute now. The math doesn't work. You pay $720 a month just to rent your apartment, but you only get $500 a month in Social Security. What are you living on?
$566. Well, it was before.
You're losing money already.
Right, because I had money left over.
Oh, you had a little stash put away.
But now it's all gone, and there's others who owe me large amounts. They don't have it. They're not answering the phone or call me back, and they act like, hey, don't bug me, you know.
Well, I learned a long time ago, Sherry, that if you lend money, it's not going to come back. You know, don't lend it with the idea of getting it back.
Well, I wish that I had believed everybody, but I hear you, and in the past I heard Dr. Dyer say so many times that if you want to do something and you really believe you can and you want to take a risk, do it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. And I know somebody who knew him quite well, and I told her before I loaned it, call him, this was like almost 4 years ago, ask him if he can help you out. And there were many others, like Marianne Williamson, she knows very well. But she didn't want to let anybody know what happened to her, so she hasn't done anything.
Well, I tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to put you on hold. I'm going to go to Tom now. He's got a text message, but stay on hold because he wants to talk with you. Tom does a lot of voice work, and he can give you some tips. But what's our text, Tom?
I have to ask you something first. I know it's maybe a generation thing, but you knew kids that soaped windows?
Yeah. Don't they still do that now?
No.
Well, now they just break them.
You're talking about like rub soap on people's windows?
Yeah, that was what they would do to be somewhat mean, I guess. They would soap windows for Halloween. They would get soap, better than wax, trust me. But they would get soap and they just write all over somebody's window.
Never heard of that. I know teeping and egging, but
you're kidding me.
Never soap.
Yeah. Soaping up windows.
This one's from Karen in Lake Tahoe, California. I love Halloween and I can't wait for Ghost to Ghost. Do you think ghosts and people in the afterlife have control of when they can visit loved ones, or do they have to be summoned by mediums?
I think they can show up whenever they want. Ghost to Ghost, by the way, is going to be Friday night, even though officially Halloween is Saturday, but we're going to do Ghost to Ghost on Friday night. Dave Schrader, I've got working for us live on Saturday. We're going to have a 2-day Halloween Fest.
Awesome.
That's going to be fun. And by the way, what's the website and the email address that you've got out there? Or do you have all the ghost stories you need now?
We have all the ones we need right now, but we'll reserve in case we don't. You can pitch some more.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Okay.
All right, appreciate that. But yeah, we're going to have some fun on Ghost to Ghost. It's going to be one heck of a time. But yeah, that's what we did when we were kids. Not me. No, not me. But kids would soap windows of homes. They were being mean. That's what they did. They, of course, threw toilet paper and trees. That was horrible because then it would rain and get soggy and just hang from there and everything else. But soaping was a thing that they did quite a bit. And, cars, if there were cars out there in the street, they'd soap up the windows. And, it came off easy. As long as it wasn't wax, it came off real easy. You just wash the car windows or the car. As simple as that. All right, Sherry, but Tom will take care of you, and we'll see what happens there. Carlos is in Carson, California. Hey, Carlos, always a pleasure. Go ahead.
Good evening, George. George, paying attention here to what's happening in California, I see across various sectors the evil implementation in a very disguised manner of a sustainable development agenda 21. I look at here in Long Beach where bike lanes are going up.
Yeah.
And of course you know what that means. That entails the reduction of travel by car.
That's right.
So as to save gas. But simultaneously you see it in San Diego, in Santa Monica, various places. But simultaneous to that, you see the legislation that's coming across in California where they're going to fix penalties now for exceeding the mileage allowed by the government authorities. Of course, so that goes hand in hand with the bike lanes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's already a water restriction going on in the state. Now they want to restrict how many miles you can drive.
Yeah, there's legislation coming up with that. They're going to impose gas restrictions, gas usage. So, of course, part of that is going to it probably entails that you can only drive so many miles, and they're going to start taxing you.
That's crazy.
So that they're spending.
Well, you know why? Because they're still making money. The taxes on gasoline, even though the price of gasoline has gone down, the taxes have not gone down. The taxes have stayed the same. So the state is still making the same amount of money on gasoline taxes than they ever were. But what are you going to do, Carlos? You're going to stay in the state, or are you going to get out of there?
No, I'm not staying here. I'm committed to California. But look, also I see apartment buildings going up, George, all over the place.
Oh, they are. I see them too out here.
Here in Carson, you see them going up there, and they're going to hurt us eventually. You'll take 10, 15, 20 years. They're going to hurt us into apartment buildings when the plan that was instituted by the Rothschilds back in 1773 to do away with private property. Of course, nobody's going to own private property anymore. The government will own it all. We're going to be herded into these apartment buildings, and then you connect it, of course, to what's happening in Santa Cruz, where in Santa Cruz, California, I believe they're no longer issuing, I think, in an article that I read, they're no longer issuing for any more building of residential properties.
None anymore. I got to check in with MZ up there, who owns our station, KSCO, and find out what the heck's going on there. That's interesting. Maybe too many people in the state, huh?
Well, no, but that's happening in Seattle, Washington also, George. The same thing.
Wow.
There's the trend. It's all part of Agenda 21. And then here, what gets me most irate, George, I own some units here in South Central L.A.
Okay.
Well, they've implemented rent control there, many years ago by communists Jane Fonda and Tom Hayden.
So you can't raise the rent?
Well, you can raise it 2 or 3%, but here's the thing, George. You have to comply with all kinds of regulations now. You have to register your units. You got to pay a fee, and not only that, inspectors from the city of LA are consistently coming down on your units.
And you got to pay them too to get it done. It's all about money, Carlos. All about money. We're at a point that we're just not going to take it anymore, aren't we? I'm going to come back in a moment. More open lines right here on Coast to Coast AM. And don't forget, at the end of the show, a little rendition of Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart. Our television program's called Beyond Belief, and you can watch it. Great promotion underway, 99 cents. But you can see all the programs, not just Beyond Belief, but everything that's put out by the network, including Cosmic Disclosure with David Wilcock and Corey Good. That's a neat program. You can get it all by going to this website, Beyond Belief, beyondbelief.com. Couple weeks By the way, we'll be going off daylight saving time. Wow, what a fast year. Everything's changing. Then Thanksgiving, right around the corner. Christmas, here we go. New Year's, and then we're into 2016. You know what's going to be weird? 2020. When we get to that. 2020. It's not too far away. All right, back to the phones we go. Let us go to Redmond, Oregon. It's Mike's turn on Coast to Coast. That's west of the Rockies, of course. Hello, Michael.
Hey, how are you doing tonight?
Good, Mike. How are you?
Good. Hey, you were talking about Edgar Allan Poe, and he was a West Point cadet, and he came from actually a rich family.
He got expelled.
And I took Army ROTC here in Oregon, and they talked very badly about Mr. Poe.
Really? Well, I mean, how much did they know about him?
Well, they talked about his drug addict problem, and they even went as far as to berate him about being married to his cousin.
Yeah, he did marry his cousin. Then she died tragically at only 24.
But, that was kind of common to marry your cousin.
In those days, you're right. They didn't have an age restriction, which is weird today, obviously. Marrying your cousin is weird today. But you're right. I mean, that happened a lot, especially in the Middle East, in the old country.
Mm-hmm.
That happened a lot. But they always told me that it would affect your children when I was a kid. I remember that.
Mm-hmm. And the last comment I was going to make was you were asking earlier about, does Edgar Allan Poe still get taught in schools? And I'm not real sure about the schools, but the Simpsons have done several Edgar Allan Poes for their Halloween special.
They've got one coming up again next week, I think.
And but they've done some wonderful, spoofs on it and stuff that they've done and stuff that I think all the Simpson fans love.
What a great show. Just keeps going, doesn't it? It's super. Hey, Mike, thanks for the call. Let's go out to Des Moines, Iowa. David's with us. Happens to be on the wild card line. Hey, David, go ahead.
Hi, George. How you doing?
Good.
Real quick, I want to tell you a quick story.
Sure.
Since you brought up Halloween when you were a kid, and you brought back memories when I trick-or-treated. But there was always people in a small town in Iowa, and I was in the early 70s, and we'd always go this guy and his wife, and she was dressed as a witch. And he would just sit there. She'd be like stirring up a pot like a witch, would have a fire underneath it, and he would sit there and read stories. Well, he read a story about the Headless Horseman. Okay, so we stopped there. It was early that night, about 7:30. And in Iowa, we would go up to about 9:30, 10 o'clock. That's how long it would go. So after listening to his story, we tried to finishing up in Perry. We were coming back, and it was around about 9:45, and we were going across these old railroad tracks, and it was real quiet. It seemed like everybody went in, and we were noticing that nobody was trick-or-treating no more. It's getting late. And it was a cold night, and the wind was blowing, so it kind of set the mood. And we were going over these tracks that trains never used anymore. And while we were going over, I said, "Did you hear that?" And he's like, "What'd you hear?" And we're stopping to listen, and I swear to God, it sounded like horses, like hoofs, running from a distance, and it felt like it was coming toward us, like echoing off the track. And he's like looking at me, scared, and I'm like, "You hearing this?" And it's like we're looking at each other. We're like about 11 years old, and we're looking at each other. And he said, "That sound like horse hooves, running, getting closer and closer." We took off running, and ever since that time, I know it's crazy. It is, and you know how kids' imagination, and during the night with the wind's blowing, the moon's at a half, it's cloudy, but the moon's showing. It's a perfect night for Halloween.
It is.
And it's like that sets the mood for you when you're a kid.
Oh, it does. It's amazing.
Yeah, but you hear these hoofs coming, and I swear to God, I can remember today that you can keep hearing it, like getting louder. And we know if the wind was picking up, getting louder and louder, and we got so scared we just took get off running back home. It's like never thought,
hightail it out of there. Do you remember the main character in the Headless Horseman?
Yes.
What,
Yes, I do.
what was his name?
Ichabod Crane.
That's it. You got it.
Yeah.
I should do a little trivia and give some books away. I haven't done that in a long time. Tom, you've got a text message. Where's it from?
It is from Washington, D.C. It's from Sam. He says, hey, do you guys think our enemies have the capability to control the weather?
I think most nations have the ability to control the weather. Boy, that was on mic. You know that?
What's
Gotta clip them. Yes, we do have the ability to control the weather. China said during the Olympics that they could control the weather. And I think we do it through HARP and everything else. So absolutely. Virginia in Jacksonville, Florida. Hi, Virginia.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. I just thought of something. I recently wrote my memoirs. I'm in my 80s. And it was about what it was like living in Hawaii, in pre-war Hawaii. My father was in charge of the instrument shop on Ford Island. And we had just moved into the Navy housing area in October. And that Halloween was my most memorable. We went trick-or-treating, and most of the inhabitants of the housing area were grown-ups, and they didn't have candy and things like that to give to us, so they gave us money.
Yep.
Well,
pennies.
Well, not just pennies, but quarters and things.
Wow,
like that.
you got quarters?
Well, I was afraid. I had always been taught to not take money from strangers, and so before I got home, I split it up with all my friends so that it wouldn't look so bad. And when I got home, my mother asked, to check the candy, so she could get the best pieces. I told her what I'd done, and she, looked kind of funny. But anyway, that was interesting. But it was well taught. I didn't give it to him. And then the end of the month, 2 months later, we were bombed.
Oh, wow.
And one of our neighbors who had given me, I think, 2 quarters because I was so cute, he was killed because he stood out there with his hand on his hip watching the planes dogfighting in and out of the housing, and a bullet went right through his hand and killed him. And our house was machine gunned, and so it was quite an experience. And my dad was back in uniform that day because they knew they were going to be attacked, and it was quite an experience. But that was my most memorable.
Oh my gosh! Of course.
Halloween money instead. Now I wish I hadn't. You look back and you think about these things.
Well, get ready for your favorite Christmas story because we'll do that when we get close to Christmas.
I've got a good one for that one.
Save it. Okay. Thanks, Virginia. Because you need to call in on that so I can say, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa. I got to be able to say that. Let's go to Sheila in Springfield, Massachusetts. Hello, Sheila. Welcome to the program.
Hello, George. Thank you for taking my call.
You are very welcome.
You asked the question, do we think we're living in end times? I think we are.
Me too.
I'm not going to set dates. That's always a silly thing to do. But I think we might be in the generation that's going to just see a major, major change in the world, in the universe, so to speak. I believe in what's called progressive revelation, which is the notion that God keeps revealing little bits to us more and more at a time. And we've had some stuff happen in the past 150 years that just indicates there's an escalation in, I would say, the supernatural, an escalation of evil, an escalation of demonic activity. And there's 2 things I want to point to out of a million things that I could tell you about. First of all, there's a prophecy that's been attributed to St. Patrick, and some people don't know it's not really a prophecy, it's just a prayer of his, but St. Patrick had a vision of the end of the world, a vision of the rise of the Antichrist, and he was so mortified by what he saw that he prayed that God would spare Ireland from this, and the best that he could pray for was that the only way Ireland could get spared would be Ireland would be plunged into the sea.
Oh, jeez.
So that was St. Patrick's prayer, that you would plunge Ireland into the sea 7 years before the end comes.
What's happening? Sea levels rising out that way?
I think sea level rise is a good indicator of that. And also, Ireland happens to lie in a general geologic fault. Iceland, not far from Ireland. Iceland, of course, has active volcanoes right now. There's whether or not those geologic faults in that region could open up. That's a speculative possibility for trying to see if maybe St. Patrick's prophecy could be fulfilled. But his prayer was that the sinking of Ireland into the sea would happen in one inundation.
Almost like Atlantis, just poof, it's gone.
Yes, poof, it's gone.
Huh.
Another one, this is more of a very classic prophecy that I would say most Christians know about. I'll just elaborate briefly. Back in the 1800s, we had a whole lot of interest in biblical prophecy, and there was, for the first time, graphical charting representations. There were really smart gentlemen back then who began drawing up graphic charts to delineate all the prophecies from the beginning of the Bible to the end. A famous one is by Charles Fitch from 1842. Then we had another one by Dr. Haldeman in the early 1900s.
Were they accurate?
It depends on your interpretation of the Bible. But they all agreed, when they were all making these charts and chit-chatting about it, and even people from different denominations with different views on this and that, they all said, there's one really difficult stumbling block in the whole timeline, and that is, it's obvious from this passage and that passage of the Bible, very obvious that there's no way we can have a major leap forward toward the end of the world unless the nation of Israel once again becomes a country. And that's not going to happen for maybe 1,000 more years. And then, boom, it happened in 1948. And that absolutely rocked the whole Christian world, like, oh no. And all these charts were getting dusted off, saying, oh my gosh, maybe this is going to happen a lot sooner than we thought. So I just wanted to throw that out there to you. And there's so many other things, like a prophecy in the book of Revelation concerning how when all the world is crumbling to pieces, people continued to not repent of this and not repent of that and not repent of their magical arts. I think that there's an insane escalation in the practice of magical arts.
Well, and that's what's happening now, too. People are not repenting, and things continue to get stranger and stranger. I think this situation with Israel and the Palestinians has got to stop. I mean, it has got to stop, or it is going to be out of control. I think we should carve a piece of Iraq and give it to the Palestinians and let them have their own homeland and fix it, build these people apartments and businesses and get them up and running again. Because when you have so many people who are unemployed, who have no hope, it's going to be out of control. And, I mean, Israel is in... Look, it's what you saw in Ferguson, Missouri. It's what you saw in Baltimore over the last couple of years. It's a full-scale riot there, except people are really dying, getting stabbed and everything else. It's out of control. Lorenzo's in Los Angeles. Hello, Lorenzo. Go ahead.
Hey, it's an honor again to talk to you, George.
Good.
Thank you. I wanted to point to maybe Exhibit A would be on the end times. You were asking to speak about the if you think we're in end times, and I think Exhibit A would be when Jesus said about like in the days of Noah, and when he'll return, and they're go hand in hand, his return and the end times. Basically, that was the catalyst for Steve Quayle, L.A. Mazzulli, and of course Chuck Missler on things that are going on as far as like maybe abductions and stuff like that, alien abductions. They all kind of tie in where that, like the barrier between dimensions or realms, if you will, is kind of getting thinner and thinner. I mean, you could just look at the evil that's increasing. I mean, you go to a movie theater and someone's shooting people.
Crazy. People have gone crazy.
Yeah, I think that barrier is getting thin and evil is increasing. I'm not sure what evolution means because I sure don't see any evidence for it. If anything, I think it's called the second law of thermodynamics, where things just get worse. We get older, things wear down. If you don't take care of them, they just get worse. So anyway, that's the Exhibit A, and there was one more, and Daniel, Michael the Archangel told him, keep this prophecy a secret till the end, when people were going to and fro, and when knowledge increases. And I think the internet, I mean, if you want to talk about knowledge increasing, just Google it if you want to look something up,
Well, the internet has done an incredible job giving people instant knowledge, information, self-help, you name it. It's an incredible tool. It really is. I mean, there is some downside to it, but it is an incredible, incredible tool. Let's go next to Indiana. Alley Cat is with us. Hello, Alley Cat. Are you going to meow for me?
Meow.
Perfect.
I can't believe I got through. I got a ghost story for you.
Okay.
Okay, I don't go searching for ghosts or go to spooky haunted places. I'm scared to death of them, right? But one night, me and my girlfriend went to a trailer that she used to live in, right? But she had to move out because weird stuff kept happening there. People were breaking in, whatever. Well, one night, I said, well, let's go just sit, down the street and just watch it and see if we can find these creeps that have been breaking in your house, right? Well, it'd been a year before that her husband had committed suicide, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
Not good.
And she was the one who found him. He shot himself, right?
Makes it even worse.
Yeah, I know. The first time I was in that house, I felt something weird before I even knew the story. But anyway, so we're sitting there in the car at night, watching our house, and we got binoculars, and we're just kind of watching the house, being silly. And I'm kept feeling like something was going to come up behind us. It was really bugging me. It was just kept getting an urgent feeling, like, hey, something's going to sneak up on you, right? And so I'm looking behind me. I'm not seeing nothing, and she's watching her house, seeing if we can see these creeps that kept, breaking in and stuff. And then I look up in my rearview mirror, and there's a man sitting directly behind her in my back seat. And I can see him clear as day. I can see his haircut. He was wearing glasses, what shirt he was wearing.
But it was a ghost.
Well,
or was it a real person?
It was a ghost because I made myself turn around and look, and no one was there.
I mean, what would be more scarier, a real person or a ghost? I think a real person.
I don't know. A real person would have had both of us whooping his tail. But this guy, I just took off. I told my parents, I said, we got to go now. And I got across town. I was flying. I was scared to death. And finally, when we stopped, I went, I quit freaking out. I told her about the guy I saw, right? Now, I'd never met her ex-husband, or her, deceased husband, I mean.
Was that him?
Yes, she said I described him to her.
Oh, my gosh. So he stayed around. We're going to come back. We're going to stay around. More open lines in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Well, welcome back to more open lines here on Coast to Coast AM. Looking forward to this. Lots of folks already on hold, so we'll get to you when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. And let's go to the island of Kauai in Hawaii. Charles is with us. Hey, Charles, go ahead.
Okay, my thinking on that was to set an explosive off above any passages in the ground and have it smash them closed.
What are you talking about, Charles? Charles, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about I'm talking about the fire in St. Louis.
Oh, okay.
The radioactive dump.
There you go. All right.
So you set the explosives off, and it crushes the passages between the present burning and the radioactive dump.
But won't that scatter the radioactive waste everywhere?
No, if there's enough room laterally, first you'd see where some porosity was with ground-penetrating radar. Then you'd set some explosives above it to crush those underground passages. And if you got to the top, you'd tamp the explosives with water so that if the water blew into the air, it would disperse and wouldn't hurt anybody.
Is it risky?
Some, but I don't know if the military knows how to do that, but it's keeping it classified. But
yeah, you may be right.
It seems reasonable, though. People think about it and work on it.
What a mess. I may go see that when I go out to St. Louis, and as we get closer to Thanksgiving, I'm going back to see the family. But, whoa, what a mess that is. He's talking about the landfill near Bridgeton, Missouri. where it has been burning for 5 years underground, a landfill. But the landfill is getting very close to a radioactive waste dump that has been going on since World War II. And who knows how much waste is there. Derek's in St. Louis. Hi, Derek. You're right there, aren't you?
Yeah, I actually talked to you yesterday about the lake that we couldn't swim in. I found out what that contamination was. It actually didn't have anything to do with the radiation. It was a chemical or a pesticide they used that they outlawed in the 70s. Farmers used it, the golf course right there used it, and also nurseries used it. But it doesn't break down. It takes a long time to break down. It actually attaches to the soil in the bottom of the lake. Then the fish feed off of it. That's why they wouldn't let us swim or eat the fish out of that lake. It's actually low enough up now where it's not as bad as it was when I was a teenager.
Well, I got to tell you though that this could be a catastrophe of biblical proportions, to be sure. Tom, you got another text message for us. What do you have?
This one's from Angela in Minnesota. Love open lines. Please pick my text because I'm dying to ask George if he thinks the middle class will keep declining or be back like it was.
Well, it all depends, I think, on who gets picked in office. Simple as that. And the way it's going, the middle class is going to be gone. Totally. You'll have the haves and the have-nots. You won't have anybody in between, and that's a huge problem. Now, if the right person comes into office and changes that, so be it. I don't see that happening right now. Patrick in Boise, Idaho. Go ahead, Patrick. It's your turn.
Hey, George. Thanks for having me on.
Sure thing.
I hope I'm not throwing you for a loop on this, but I heard other people talking about kind of Halloween memories, and I know it's not ghost to ghost.
That's okay.
I did want to share with you something that, when I'm in my 50s, so when I was a kid, it wasn't at all unusual for us to get like candied popcorn balls or carameled apples, when we were trick-or-treating. And here where I'm from, in Idaho, it wasn't uncommon, but when we'd get it, it was just, score, we got it. Beef jerky. And they would hand out beef jerky and venison jerky. I mean,
God, I would want it in the package sealed as opposed to just dropped into the bag. How did they?
Oh no!
What did they do?
No. No, there'd be a bowl, and you'd reach in and grab all the jerky that you want, usually like venison jerky or something like that, right? But I got to tell you, when I was just a little kid prior to being a teenager, we grew up, I don't know, 9 or 10. There was a few of us, and I think we were probably exploring the trick side of trick or treating. I remember that we went up to this one place, and this was a great town to trick-or-treat in. Every house, it was just fantastic. And I don't really know why it happened, but a house had a whole bunch of pumpkins around it. And I remember that a buddy of mine ended up, he actually stole a pumpkin, and we ended up running. There's 4 of us. We're just little kids, right? And for us, that was like a big deal. That was like the hype of the century. It was the big holdup. We stole a pumpkin, and we're running down the pavement. My buddy hands me the pumpkin, and I take the pumpkin, and I'm running, and there's all 4 of us. These little kids were running down the road, and I'm carrying that pumpkin, but the weight of the pumpkin ends up just dropping me to the pavement. I drop the pumpkin rolls out in front of me, and it rolls for some time, and it veers to the right. So my buddy's to the left, I'm on the pavement, pumpkin veers to the right, and it, just like out of a bowling alley, knocks my two buddies to the right, they hit the pumpkin, they both fell over. And here I am all these decades later, and I still remember that.
That's
regret
funny.
That we stole it, but it was just one of the most classic things that you could ever imagine for Halloween.
I would have thought the pumpkin would have smashed when you dropped it, but you didn't.
Well, it wasn't. This was a solid pumpkin. It wasn't carved.
Oh, so it had the entire weight to it.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm just like 9 or 10 years old here, and God knows what it was, 10 or 15.
I used to love reaching into the pumpkin and pulling that gook out.
Oh, yeah.
That was something.
Yeah, and taking the seeds,
Oh, it just amazed me how many seeds were in that thing.
Oh, if nobody's ever taken a moment to, take the extra time, you'll find it well worth it to take the seeds out, separate it from the gook, or whatever you called it, take the time and then you bake those seeds, a little bit of salt on top of it.
Oh, it's great. My mother used to do that. She used to just dry them out, put them in the oven, and they were amazing.
That's a part of Halloween, and that's just. I'll tell you, some of these memories, things like that, they'll stick with you forever. But thanks for having me on that.
Yeah, you got that. Or you could dry the seeds out and plant them, which was also really cool. I got to tell you, as a kid, there was nothing more fascinating than watching a pumpkin grow from a little seed. I mean, it was really something else. I mean, I really enjoyed it. Let's go to the Bronx, east of the Rockies. Welcome to the show, Tom. Go ahead.
George,
hey.
Glad to be on.
Thank you.
I'd like to say this, that years back, I was on like a small trip, and I went up to Boston to see the Pilgrims and the Cassateurs. I don't know whether you ever heard of them, and the bus. But anyway, I was in this hotel room, and I was sleeping, and all of a sudden, I started to say, "Ma, ma, ma." Well, my mother was in the Bronx over here, the building where I am now, and with my father, and she was sleeping, and believe it or not, we had communication. She heard my voice on this end, and like in a sleeping daze, I can almost see her and my father right in the room where I was, the hotel room where I was. This adds to like ghost stories, but this is a true story. And all of a sudden, my father told her, "Tom isn't here. Tom went on this trip." Well, when I got home, I started telling my mother the same story. What happened? And she said, "Yes, I heard your voice." And the mind is actually like a radio signal. It was she was able to hear me. I was able to hear her. Believe it or not.
That's magic.
That adds to these ghost stories too. When people that see things in the room and all that. So there is mentally there is a connection between humans like that. Like One Step Beyond. You ever remember One Step
classics.
Beyond?
I loved it.
Well, that was always the guy dressed like he was in a funeral home. The guy that ran that program. To me, anyway.
One Step.
But that's the story I have for you, anyway.
Okay. Hey, thanks. Appreciate you being on the program. We go to Portland, Oregon. Dr. Sleepless is there. You never sleep, do you?
Hello, George.
Hey,
how you doing tonight?
Good, Doc. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic. I just wanted to say something about this thing called the end times. My question is, the end of what? Is it the end of income inequality? Is it the end of bad government? If it's the end of those things, I'm all for it. So, personally, I would like people to visualize positive as far as the end times are concerned, because there's a lot of good things coming down the pike. I have it on good authority.
I hope you're right. Now, is this the end of the beginning, or is it the beginning of the end? That is the question. We have now Ryan in Vancouver in the state of Washington. Hello, Ryan. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I'm just across the river from Portland, Oregon.
Yes, you are. It's a great area out there.
Yeah, I'll keep this quick. I know you were in the Navy.
Yep, 9
years. I was wondering, your father, he was a World War II veteran.
Yes, he was.
My grandfather was on a flat top aircraft carrier during, I think he was even at one of the battles of Iwo Jima. But I'll keep it quick. What branch was he in?
He was in the Army, and he was in the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh, he's okay against the Germans over there. Oh,
yep.
Wow. You were talking about the witches so much, I started thinking of Agnes Moorehead and Elizabeth Montgomery in that show Bewitched.
I love that show.
Oh, that woman, they were both beautiful women.
When she twinkled her nose, I loved it.
Oh yeah, I didn't mean to ramble. I go off. I got OCD, so I go off on stuff different subjects. Now you have a good night, okay?
Okay, you too.
Love talking with you.
Thanks. Those were classic old TV shows. They really were, and they don't do it like that anymore. They really don't. Don is in Oregon. Hello, Don. Go ahead. It's your turn.
Hi, George.
Hey, Donald.
Hey, this end times thing. Well, first off, let me preface this.
Okay.
Have Tom tell you the story how we live in the same neighborhood, separated by 55 years. See if he remembers that.
You and Tom?
Yeah, we live in the same neighborhood, separated by 55 years.
All
I
right.
live there now. I used to live there 55 years ago.
Okay, I will do that.
Anyway, about the end times, isn't that kind of relative? I mean, we've seen 3 snowball Earths. We've had volcanisms. Civilizations have come and gone. And, with all the fur, the only difference now is we have nuclear weapons. But I think if we bombed ourselves to oblivion, the planet would recover and, go on without.
Sure. I think it's happened before, don't you?
Sure. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Now, this planet has been crushed before, and civilizations have been crushed, yet it keeps bouncing back over and over again. It's very resilient. We have Charles in Baltimore. Welcome to the show. Hey, Charles, go ahead.
Yes. First of all, I want to pay you a compliment, and I didn't have a chance to do it, so I'll do it now. Okay.
All right.
I'm the blind person who talked about tiger, and that was really tough when you talked about dogs. And you really have a soft spot in your heart for people. You really do. So,
well, thank you.
I want to thank you for that. And I got a couple of jokes for you too, but I do want to thank you for that.
All right, you're very welcome. I appreciate that.
Go ahead. So that was tough, but that's life, and life goes on. Now I got a couple of jokes for you.
All right.
A couple of ghost jokes. I went by your producer, your phone screener. This is not to offend. I have a sense of humor.
As long as it's not bad language or anything like that.
Right, no, it isn't. Okay, who visits the cemetery after dark?
Who visits a cemetery after dark? I don't know.
Casper.
Okay.
What do they call a funeral home after everybody leaves?
What do they call a funeral home after everybody leaves? What?
A haunted house.
All right. Those are so bad, they're funny.
Yeah, well, good. You're supposed to laugh. I love to hear you laugh. Here's another one. Okay, why do they close the gate after dark at the cemetery?
Why do they close the gate after dark at the cemetery? Because people are dying to get in?
Well, that's one. Another one. Another one is to keep the dead people in and keep the live people out.
Yep. All right. Something like that. Thanks, Charles. Call in on open lines on Ghost to Ghost with better jokes, if you would. Much better. Let's go to Jeff in Hutchinson, Kansas, right there in the plains of the Midwest. Jeffrey, you're up with us.
Yes, good morning, George.
Hi, how are you, Jeff?
Oh, pretty good. I had a couple things for it. Now I was going to tell you something that happened here in town. When I was a kid, I had to be like 4 or 5 years old because my sister came around when I was 6. And my mom used to put a TV tray in front of the front door on the porch with candy and a note there that said, please don't take it all, take 1 or 2 at a time. And we'd go out walking around the neighborhood, and we'd come back, and there'd always be candy left. Nobody'd steal it all.
Oh, nowadays, it's gone.
Yeah, but the whole porch would be gone.
The porch is gone. The bucket is gone. Everything's gone.
We had a lady that lived a couple blocks away, and I don't know. I was a little kid, so this big pot seemed like it was bigger, but she had a big pot that acted like it was boiling. Nowadays, I think it must have been maybe dry ice or something. And she was dressed great in a witch outfit that scared me. And she would give away all this free candy, and and caramel apples and all kinds of stuff, and it was great.
I loved caramel apples. I still do. I haven't had one in a long time, but they are good. Not the ones that are really hard, but with the softer caramel.
You're talking about candy.
Yeah, the candy apples I didn't like.
Yeah, I didn't like those either. We have a huge 4-story building that's still here in town. In fact, there's a family that owns it and is living in it now, and it was a warehouse/manufacturing candy company. And this was many years ago, and one of the owners was found. He was laying on the floor facing the elevator, like he was looking down into the well of the elevator, but the elevator came down and decapitated him.
Oh, my God.
So you know where they found his head, but they always said it was an accident, that he must have heard something and was looking in it, but no one knew if it was, somebody was murdered.
Way to die. I assume it was pretty darn quick, wasn't it?
You would think so.
Oh, my gosh, you would hope so. I mean, I was reading reports on plane crashes. Don't ask me why. And they were hypothesizing on people on how long that they lived in the planes that went down. This was the one that crashed over Ukraine that was hit by the missile built in Russia. And they were talking about whether people were alive or they died instantly, they lost oxygen. How did they do that? Gosh, I would hope for anybody's sake that it happens so quickly, so very fast, that they just don't feel any pain at all. Anyways, a couple little quick business notes, too. Make sure you like us on Facebook. You can do that by going to coasttocoastam.com. Follow us on Twitter. We send notes out for you every day. Don't forget to sign up if you're single at paranormaldate.com. We're approaching 28,000 members now, and my goal is to get us to 34,000 by the end of December. So jump on board with that. They are actively working on a reality show on paranormaldate.com, and the apps we should unveil, I hope, next week. The Android app, that should be done and ready to go. You might be able to pick that up in your Google store. I'll let you know about that. Then we work on the iPhone app, and I'm going to come back with more in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Well, it's that time to thank all of you who listen to Coast on our 615 radio stations across North America. Thank you so much for everything you do, the support over the years. Coast Insiders, thank you so much. And then XM Sirius Talk, channel 146. How about the various chat rooms out there? Into Infinity, Fantastic Forum 2, Imaginative World, Sorcery, IRC, those who follow us on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, Yahoo Chats, the Northern Kentucky Paranormal Group, the SoCal UFO Meetup Group, the Hollywood Ghost Hunters, and our buddy Greg the Cook in St. Louis. Thanks for supporting Coast to Coast AM. Okay, welcome back to Coast, a marvelous time. By the way, we've got Lisa Garr for you on, let's see, Saturday, and George Knapp on Sunday, and then I'll be back on Monday for you here on Coast to Coast. Tom, you've got a text for us and a quick question.
We do. Last one of the night. This is from Raffi in Louisville, Kentucky.
Raffi, I like that.
George, what did you do with the penny that you hated getting at Halloween?
I don't remember.
You didn't save it?
What could you get for a penny in those days?
Well, no, but you could put it in your piggy bank.
Could you buy? I didn't have a piggy bank.
Huh.
I ran the Federal Reserve at the age of 12. Yeah. I don't know. I can't remember what I did with the penny. I guess it could buy what? A little piece of licorice or something?
But you didn't like it.
No, I wanted something of substance. I wanted candy.
Do you think the people that gave stuff that we didn't like apples or stuff, were they like really trying to make the kids be healthy, or were they just being like cheap and not buying candy?
They were being cheap.
You think so?
Yeah, no doubt. At least that's what we thought as a kid. Anyways, thanks, Tom. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladesor, Timothy Banal, Stephanie Smith, Chris Borelson, George Knapp, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.